Sir, I'm telling you one last time. Step off this property right now.
Sheriff. This is my land. Been in my family for 50 years. I'm standing right where I'm supposed to be.
Deed or no deed, the county says otherwise. You refuse, you're trespassing. County paperwork don't change the truth. You know that.
You just heard the voice of a man standing at a crossroads between justice and theft. That man's name was Daniel Rivers. And on that hot Alabama afternoon, with a corrupt sheriff at his gate and cameras rolling, he made a choice that would expose a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of county government. But before I tell you how this story ends, with federal agents, handcuffs, and a sheriff learning that the law applies to everyone, let me take you back. Back to where it all began. Back to the red soil and the stories carried in that soil. Back 150 years to a time when Daniel's family first touched this land. Because you can't understand what happened without understanding what was at stake. And what was at stake was more than property. It was memory. It was proof. It was everything. Hey, before we continue, if you believe in justice, if you believe a family's legacy is worth protecting, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. This story deserves to be heard, and there are so many more stories like it that need to be told. Let's start at the beginning. The year was 1873. Picture Alabama in those years right after the Civil War. The old order was dying, but slowly, reluctantly, violently, and in that chaos, in that brief window when anything seemed possible, a man named Isaiah Rivers did something extraordinary. Isaiah had been born enslaved, born as property on the very plantation where he'd worked from childhood. He'd picked cotton on that land, bled on it, buried family there, and when freedom came, when the chains finally broke, he didn't run. He stayed. And then he bought it. Think about that for a moment. Really think about it. A man who had been owned, purchased the land where he'd been enslaved, paid for it with money he'd saved doing odd jobs, working as a freedman, denying himself everything except the dream of ownership. 200 acres. That's what the deed said when it was registered in 1873. 200 acres of red Alabama clay. The white family who'd owned it was happy to sell. They thought the soil was exhausted, the land worthless. They took Isaiah's money and left for Texas, probably laughing at the fool who'd bought worn-out farmland. But Isaiah Rivers wasn't a fool. He was a dreamer with calloused hands and an unbreakable will. He built a house on that land. Small at first, just 4 rooms, but solid, real. He planted crops, not cotton, never cotton again, but corn and vegetables and fruit trees. He married a woman named Sarah, and together they had 6 children. And every single one of those children was born free, on land their father owned. Isaiah did something else, too, something that would echo down through the generations. He kept papers, every receipt, every tax payment, every survey. He kept them in a metal box that he hid under the floorboards of that little house, because Isaiah understood something fundamental. For a black man in the post-war South, documentation was survival. Paper was protection. The deed was the only thing standing between him and dispossession. He told his children, they'll always find a way to take what's ours if they can. You keep these papers safe. You keep them sacred. They're proof we exist, proof we matter. The farm passed to Isaiah's son, Thomas Rivers, who expanded it during the hard years of the early 1900s. Thomas bought adjacent parcels when other families, broken by economic collapse, had to sell. He modernized, built a proper barn, the red barn that still stands today, dug wells, bought equipment, and he kept the papers just like his father taught him. Thomas raised his own children during the Depression, during Jim Crow, during years when being a black landowner in Alabama could get you killed. But the Rivers family held on. They farmed, they survived, they refused to let go. The land passed to Daniel's father, Marcus Rivers, in 1975. Marcus was a quiet man, but strong in the way that deep roots are strong. He farmed that land through the civil rights era and beyond, watching the world change around him while the red soil stayed the same. Marcus taught his son Daniel the same lesson his grandfather had taught him. They've been trying to take this land since we got it. Every generation, someone tries. You hold on. You hear me? You hold on. Daniel inherited the farm in 2005 when his father passed. By then, the world around the Rivers farm had changed completely. The nearest town, once a sleepy rural crossroads, was growing. Birmingham's sprawl was reaching farther every year. Developers were buying up farmland, building subdivisions and shopping centers, and 200 acres of prime land sitting right in the path of development. That was too valuable to ignore. That's when Vincent Sterling showed up. Vincent Sterling was the kind of man who saw the world in terms of deals and profit margins. Real estate developer, strip mall magnate, a man who'd made millions turning farmland into parking lots. He wanted the Rivers property, wanted it badly. He could already see it, a luxury development. Upscale homes for Birmingham professionals looking for that country living aesthetic. Maybe a golf course. Definitely a clubhouse. He could sell those lots for a fortune. There was just one problem. Daniel Rivers wasn't selling. Sterling made offers, started at $800,000, then $1 million, then $1.5 million. Each time, Daniel turned him down politely but firmly. Mr. Sterling, I appreciate the offer, but this land's not for sale. Everyone has a price, Mr. Rivers. Not for this. This is family. Sterling didn't understand. To him, land was inventory, square footage, development potential. But to Daniel, those 200 acres were something else entirely. They were proof that his great-great-grandfather had transformed himself from property to property owner. They were his father's legacy, his children's inheritance, his family's testament to survival. You can't put a price on that. But Vincent Sterling didn't get rich by accepting no for an answer. He had resources, connections, and he had something else. Sheriff Wade Tanner. Wade Tanner had been sheriff of Oakwood County for 12 years. He'd come up through the system the old-fashioned way, knowing the right people, doing the right favors, looking the other way when it benefited the right folks. He didn't see his badge as a responsibility. He saw it as leverage. And Vincent Sterling knew how to use leverage. The details would come out later in federal court, but the basics were simple enough. Sterling funneled money to Tanner through shell companies and campaign contributions. Nothing too obvious, nothing too traceable. Just enough to make Tanner comfortable, to make him willing to bend the rules. In return, Tanner would find a way to make the Rivers property available. What Tanner did next is part of a pattern that's been robbing black families of their land for over a century. It's a story that repeats itself across the South, across America, year after year. And it starts with something called heirs property. Here's how it works. When someone dies without a will, which happened often in black families because access to lawyers was limited, because trust in the legal system was low, their property passes to all their heirs as joint owners. If there are multiple heirs and they don't formally subdivide the property, any one of them can force a partition sale where the land is sold and the proceeds divided. Or worse, if anyone can claim they're an heir, they can challenge the ownership. Tanner's first plan was to manufacture an heir. He found a distant cousin of the Rivers family, someone who'd left Alabama decades ago and barely remembered the connection. Offered this person cash to sign paperwork claiming they had a stake in the property. Then he'd use that claim to force a partition sale, where Sterling could swoop in and buy the land for pennies on the dollar. It was fraud. Simple, elegant, and they'd done it before. But Daniel's lawyer was sharp. She spotted the fake claim immediately, challenged it in court. That plan collapsed. So Tanner escalated. He went to the county tax assessor, another man in Sterling's pocket, and had them declare the Rivers property abandoned. They claimed Daniel hadn't paid property taxes in 3 years. It was a lie. Daniel had receipts for every payment, just like his great-great-grandfather had taught. But Tanner moved forward anyway, initiating foreclosure proceedings. When Daniel showed up with his documentation, Tanner claimed the county records had been lost in a computer error. This is what corruption looks like. Not dramatic, not violent, just paperwork. Just men in offices rewriting records to benefit the powerful. Just theft dressed up as bureaucracy. But Daniel Rivers had been preparing for this his whole life. He'd grown up on stories of land theft. He'd watched it happen to neighbors, seen families lose farms that had been theirs for generations. His father had warned him. His grandfather's words echoed in his memory. Keep the papers, know your rights. When they come, and they will come, you be ready. So when the first threatening letter arrived from the sheriff's office, notice of tax delinquency and pending foreclosure, Daniel didn't panic. He went to his filing cabinet, pulled out his tax receipts, made copies, and then he made a phone call. Not to a local lawyer, not to the county board, not to anyone in Alabama who might be in Sterling's pocket or afraid of Tanner's badge. He called the FBI. The agent who answered was Supervisory Special Agent Lisa Martinez, part of the FBI's Civil Rights Division. She'd been investigating patterns of land theft and corruption in rural Alabama for 3 years. When Daniel explained what was happening, a sheriff manufacturing foreclosure documents, a developer bribing public officials, she recognized it immediately. "Mr. Rivers," she told him, "I need you to do something difficult. I need you to let this play out." Daniel understood immediately. If the FBI moved too soon, they'd get Tanner on document fraud, maybe. But they wouldn't get Sterling. They wouldn't expose the whole system. They wouldn't stop this from happening to the next family. They needed Tanner to go far enough to hang himself. How far? Daniel asked quietly. "Until he tries to physically remove you from your land. Until he commits himself completely to this illegal act. That's when we move." There was silence on the line. "Mr. Rivers, are you willing to do that?" Daniel thought about his great-great-grandfather Isaiah, keeping papers under the floorboards. He thought about his grandfather Thomas holding on through the Depression. He thought about his father Marcus, who'd told him, "You hold on." "I'm willing," Daniel said. So began the most difficult months of Daniel Rivers' life. He had to watch the foreclosure proceedings move forward, had to let Tanner think he was winning, had to hire a local lawyer who made just enough noise to look like resistance, but not enough to spook Tanner into backing off. All while the FBI built their case in the shadows. Agent Martinez explained the plan in a meeting at a federal building 3 counties away, far from Tanner's reach. They'd let Tanner come to enforce the eviction himself. They'd let him try to remove Daniel from his own land, on camera, with witnesses. And when Tanner was in the deepest, when he'd committed himself completely, that's when they'd spring the trap. "You're going to be the bait," Martinez told him. "I won't lie to you. There's risk. If something goes wrong, if Tanner gets violent..." "He won't," Daniel said quietly. "Men like Tanner are only tough when they think they have the power. The moment that shifts, they fold." Martinez studied him. "You've been thinking about this for a while." "My whole life," Daniel said. The day came on a Tuesday in late July. The heat was oppressive. That thick Alabama heat that makes the air shimmer and turns every breath into labor. Daniel was on his porch in his usual spot when he saw the dust cloud on the road. 3 vehicles, sheriff's cars, lights flashing. Tanner was making a show of it. Daniel stood up slowly, put on his hat, walked down to the gate. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears, but his hands were steady. Everything depended on the next 10 minutes. The cars pulled up in a semicircle, kicking up red dust. Tanner stepped out first, his hand resting casual-like on his service weapon. A threat he didn't even need to speak out loud. 2 deputies flanked him. Both young, both looking uncomfortable, like they knew something wasn't right but didn't know what to do about it. Tanner's body camera was rolling. So were 6 FBI cameras hidden in the barn and the trees. Tanner stopped at the gate, looked at Daniel standing on the other side, and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Daniel Rivers," Tanner said, and his voice carrying that particular tone of authority men use when they're used to being obeyed. "I'm here to execute a lawful eviction. You've got 60 seconds to vacate this property." Daniel didn't move. "Did you hear me?" Tanner's voice got harder. "I said you need to leave. This property has been foreclosed on by Oakwood County for non-payment of taxes. You are trespassing." "I paid my taxes, Sheriff. Got the receipts in the house if you want to see them." Tanner shook his head, that same smile still on his face. "County says different. And in case you forgot, I enforce what the county says, not what some farmer claims." One of the young deputies shifted uncomfortably. Daniel caught it. The kid knew something was wrong, but he wasn't going to speak up. Not against his boss. "This land has been in my family since 1873, Daniel said, his voice calm and clear. "My great-great-grandfather bought it. My grandfather farmed it. My father passed it to me. I have the deed. Original deed, filed with the state of Alabama." "Had the deed," Tanner corrected. "Past tense, property's been seized." He pulled a paper from his pocket, unfolded it with theatrical flair. "This here is the foreclosure order, signed by Judge Harrison. Says you gotta go." "Judge Harrison," Daniel said evenly, "plays golf with Vincent Sterling, doesn't he?" Tanner's smile faltered, just for a moment. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything, Sheriff. I'm saying it plain. Sterling wants my land. You're helping him take it, and you're using the law to do it." "That's slander," Tanner snapped. "You better watch your mouth." "It's the truth." The sheriff's face darkened. This wasn't going the way he'd planned. He'd expected either compliance or the kind of angry resistance he could use to justify force. But Daniel was too calm, too precise. It was unnerving. Tanner took a step closer to the gate. "Sir, I'm telling you one last time. Step off this property right now." Daniel met his eyes. "Not leaving, Sheriff. This is my land. Been in my family 50 years. I'm standing right where I'm supposed to be." 50 years? Tanner laughed. "Try again. This property's been in county records as abandoned for 3 years." "That's a lie, and you know it." "Careful," Tanner warned. "You're real close to adding obstruction to your charges." "What charges?" Daniel asked. "Being on my own land?" Tanner's jaw clenched. "Deed or no deed, the county says otherwise. You refuse, you're trespassing." "County paperwork don't change the truth." "You know that." For a moment, there was silence. Just the sound of wind through the trees and the distant call of a crow. The two deputies looked at each other. One of them whispered something Daniel couldn't hear. Tanner took another step forward. His hand moved back to his gun, not drawing it, but making sure Daniel saw the motion. "All right, that's it. By order of the sheriff's office." He reached for his handcuffs. Daniel didn't move. Didn't resist. He just did one thing. He looked toward the barn and nodded. What happened next happened fast. The barn door swung open, but it wasn't farmhands who emerged. It was FBI agents in tactical gear, FBI in bright yellow letters across their vests. From the tree line on both sides, more agents appeared, rifles in ready positions. And from the dirt road behind Tanner's vehicles, a black SUV rolled up, slow and deliberate. Tanner spun around, his hand going instinctively to his weapon. "What the—" "Sheriff Tanner, keep your hands where we can see them!" The voice came from one of the agents stepping forward from the barn. A woman in her 40s, gray streaks in her hair, eyes like steel. "Supervisory Special Agent Lisa Martinez, FBI. Do not reach for your weapon." The two deputies immediately raised their hands. The younger one looked like he might faint. Tanner stood frozen, his mind clearly racing to catch up with reality. The black SUV stopped. A man in a suit stepped out, mid-50s, wire-rimmed glasses, carrying a briefcase like it was a weapon. Assistant U.S. Attorney James Chen, Northern District of Alabama. He walked past Tanner's cars like they weren't even there. Walked right up to the gate where Daniel was still standing. "Sheriff Tanner, Chen said, his voice carrying across the yard with absolute authority. I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney James Chen. You are currently the subject of a federal investigation into corruption, bribery, fraud, and conspiracy to deprive Mr. Daniel Rivers of his civil rights under color of law. Tanner found his voice. This is my county. This is United States territory, Chen interrupted. And you've just committed multiple federal crimes on camera. He gestured to Tanner's own body camera. Your camera, our cameras, all of it recorded. Agent Martinez approached, another agent flanking her. Sheriff Wade Tanner, you are under arrest. Charges include conspiracy to commit fraud, deprivation of rights under color of law, accepting bribes from Vincent Sterling, and falsification of county records to facilitate illegal seizure of property. You can't, Tanner started, but his voice had lost all its authority. He sounded like what he was, a man who just realized his world was ending. We can, Martinez said. We have. She pulled out her own handcuffs. Turn around, hands behind your back. For a moment, Tanner looked like he might run. His eyes darted to his car, to the road, to his deputies, who were already being separated and read their rights by other agents. There was nowhere to go. He turned around. The metallic click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the Alabama afternoon. You have the right to remain silent, Martinez began, and Daniel listened to every word. The arrests made national news. Alabama sheriff arrested in land theft scheme targeting black farmer. The story had everything cable news loves: corruption, racial injustice, a dramatic FBI sting. They ran it for days. But for Daniel, the real satisfaction wasn't in the headlines. It was in the document that arrived 3 weeks later. Official notification from Oakwood County that all foreclosure proceedings against his property had been dismissed. With prejudice. His land was his. Clear and uncontested. Vincent Sterling was indicted on 14 federal charges. The FBI had found a pattern of corruption stretching back years. Tanner wasn't the only public official on his payroll. There was a county commissioner, 2 judges, a tax assessor. The whole network came tumbling down. Sterling tried to fight it. He had expensive lawyers, political connections, the kind of resources that usually make problems disappear. But federal prosecutors don't scare easily, and the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, recorded conversations, email trails, everything a jury would need to see exactly what kind of man he was. The trial was set for the following spring. Sterling's lawyers were already floating plea deals. Sheriff Wade Tanner took a deal 4 months after his arrest. Pled guilty to conspiracy and deprivation of rights. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. 7 years for thinking he was above the law. 7 years for trying to steal a man's heritage. The younger deputy cooperated fully. He testified about the culture of corruption in the sheriff's department, about cases where evidence disappeared, about the way Tanner ran the county like his personal kingdom. In exchange, he avoided jail time but lost his badge. Last anyone heard, he was working construction in Georgia. Judge Harrison resigned under pressure. The state bar opened an investigation. He'd probably lose his license. And Daniel? Daniel went back to farming. The media wanted interviews. Everyone wanted to hear from the man who'd taken down a corrupt sheriff. Daniel did a few, enough to tell his story, enough to make sure people understood this wasn't just about him. This happens every day, he told one reporter. Black farmers losing their land to schemes like this. Heirs property laws, tax foreclosures, fraudulent deeds. It's been going on for over 100 years. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I got justice because I had help. Because the FBI took my case seriously, but how many others didn't? How many families lost everything and nobody cared? The reporter asked if he'd ever consider selling now. With all the attention, all the publicity, other developers were probably interested. Daniel just smiled. This land isn't for sale. Not now. Not ever. My great-great-grandfather bought this land with money he saved after being freed from slavery. He built a life here. My grandfather expanded it. My father protected it. And I'm going to pass it to my children the same way it was passed to me. Clear, legal, and ours. Here's the part of this story that extends far beyond one farm in Alabama. Between 1910 and 1997, African-American farmers lost approximately 90% of their land, about 14 million acres. That land wasn't lost to bad farming or bad luck. It was stolen. Stolen through legal loopholes, discriminatory lending practices, violence, and schemes exactly like what Wade Tanner tried to pull on Daniel Rivers. The primary tool was heirs' property. When black landowners died without wills, because access to lawyers was limited, because trust in the legal system was low, because sometimes they couldn't read or write due to being denied education, their land would pass to all their heirs as joint owners. This created vulnerability. Any heir could force a sale. Any heir could be pressured, bribed, or coerced into giving up their claim, triggering a partition sale where the entire property would be auctioned. And guess who showed up to those auctions? White developers and speculators ready to buy land at a fraction of its value. Even when black farmers had clear title, they faced obstacles. Banks would refuse loans for improvements. Tax assessors would overvalue their property, raising their tax burden. And if they fell behind on those inflated taxes, foreclosure. Tax sales, loss. The USDA itself, the federal agency supposed to help farmers, discriminated against black farmers for decades. Between 1981 and 1985 alone, black farmers filed more than 10,000 complaints about discrimination in USDA loan programs. Almost none were investigated. This isn't ancient history. Pigford versus Glickman, the class action lawsuit where black farmers sued the USDA for systematic discrimination, was settled in 1999. 1999? Some of you weren't even born when black farmers were still fighting the federal government for equal treatment. And the land theft continues. It's more subtle now, hidden in legal complexity and bureaucratic processes. But it's still happening. Developers still circle black-owned land in areas undergoing gentrification. Tax foreclosures still disproportionately target black property owners. Heirs' property is still a vulnerability. What Daniel Rivers did, standing his ground, documenting everything, bringing in federal authorities, that's the exception. For every Daniel Rivers who gets justice, there are dozens of families who lose their land and their history without anyone noticing. That's why this story matters. There's something about land that goes deeper than property law or market value. Land is memory. It's the place where your grandparents met, where your parents were married, where you learned to walk. It's the soil you've worked, the trees you've climbed, the horizon you've known your entire life. For Daniel Rivers, those 200 acres represented something even more profound, proof that his family had survived. His great-great-grandfather had been born as property. Within one generation, he'd become a property owner. That transformation, from enslaved to landowner, was one of the most remarkable achievements in American history. And people like Wade Tanner and Vincent Sterling wanted to erase it. Not because they hated Daniel personally, they probably didn't think about him as a person at all. They wanted to erase it because the land was valuable and they saw an opportunity. That's the casual cruelty of this kind of corruption. It's not motivated by ideology or hatred. It's motivated by greed and the belief that some people's history matters less than other people's profits. When Tanner showed up that day with his fake eviction notice, he wasn't just trying to remove a farmer from his property. He was trying to sever a connection that stretched back 150 years. He was trying to erase evidence that Black Americans had built wealth, had created legacies, had succeeded despite everything designed to stop them. And he thought it would be easy. He thought his badge gave him the authority. He thought Sterling's money gave him the power. He thought Daniel would be like so many others before him, isolated, afraid, unable to fight back. He was wrong. What Daniel understood, what his father and grandfather had taught him, was that the only thing standing between justice and theft was documentation and determination. Keep your records, know your rights, And when the time comes, stand your ground. The FBI helped. The federal prosecutors helped. But they could only help because Daniel had done the groundwork. He'd kept those receipts, maintained those deeds, documented every interaction. He'd made it impossible for Tanner to claim ignorance or confusion. He'd built the case that the FBI could then use to bring down the whole corrupt network. That's the lesson here. Justice doesn't come from waiting for someone else to save you. It comes from doing the work, day after day, to protect what's yours. And then, when the moment arrives, being brave enough to stand on your own land and say, "No, not this time. Not to me." Daniel Rivers is still farming his 200 acres. The red barn his grandfather built is still standing. The fence line his great-great-grandfather drew is still the property line. Nothing changed, except now everyone knows it's his. Vincent Sterling's luxury development was never built. The land he wanted to develop, the legacy he wanted to destroy, remains exactly what it's always been: a family farm worked by the descendants of the man who bought it in 1873. Sheriff Wade Tanner is in federal prison in Kentucky. He'll be eligible for parole in 2029 when he'll be 63 years old. He'll leave prison with nothing: his pension forfeited, his reputation destroyed, his belief in his own immunity shattered. And Daniel, when asked what the whole experience taught him, gave an answer that echoes across American history. "I learned what my grandfather tried to tell me. They'll always come for what's yours if they think they can take it. Always. Doesn't matter what the law says. Doesn't matter what's right. If they think they can take it, they'll try." He paused. "The only question is whether you're going to let them." He didn't. The Rivers family farm has been in the family for 152 years now. With luck and continued vigilance, it'll be there for 152 more. This story isn't over. Across America, black farmers and landowners are still fighting to hold onto their property. Some will win, some will lose. But every time someone like Daniel Rivers stands their ground and wins, it makes it harder for the next Wade Tanner to try. That's the real justice here. Not just that one corrupt sheriff went to prison, but that one family kept their land. That one connection to history remained unbroken. That one piece of evidence that Black Americans built wealth and legacy and future remained standing. Sometimes the system works. Sometimes the arc of the moral universe does bend toward justice. But it doesn't bend on its own. It takes people like Daniel standing at their gate, refusing to move, building the case that will eventually bring down the powerful. It takes documentation. It takes courage. It takes the kind of stubborn determination that says, "This is mine and you will not take it from me." It takes remembering that the land remembers. The land keeps score. And on one farm in Alabama, surrounded by red clay and possibility, the land is still in the right hands. If you believe in that kind of justice, share this story. Make sure people know that corruption can be beaten, that federal law still means something, and that a man's connection to his land, to his history, to his family, to his legacy, is worth fighting for. The land remembers. And it's time we all remembered too. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Hit that like button. Share this video, because somewhere right now, another family is fighting to keep their land. Another corrupt official thinks they can get away with it. Another piece of history is one signature away from being erased. Your share could be what helps the next Daniel Rivers find the courage to stand their ground. Your subscription tells YouTube to push these stories to more people who need to hear them. We're building a community that believes justice isn't just a word. It's something worth fighting for. And every like, every share, every subscription is a vote that says, these stories matter. This history matters. This fight matters. So subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story. And drop a comment below telling me, what would you have done in Daniel's position? Would you have trusted the FBI? Would you have stood your ground? The land remembers. Let's make sure we all remember too. I'll see you in the next one.